He never danced until the girl with the red boots asked him twice. The toe of that red boot stopped about a foot from my own and didn't move. I'd been watching the floor instead of the band, the way you watch a fire so you don't have to look at the people around it. And the boots came into the bottom of my eye the way weather comes over a ridge, there before you've decided what to do about it. Red, not new, scuffed pale at the toe and dark with somebody's barn at the heel, and the stitching gone gray where it once was white. A working boot somebody had decided to make pretty a long time ago, and then just kept wearing. I knew whose they were before I looked up. There wasn't another pair like them in the county, and there wasn't another woman in that Grange Hall who'd plant herself in front of a man who'd already told her no once and wait to be looked at. I want to back up. I'm no good at telling a thing straight through. My wife used to say I'd start a story in the middle and tell you the end before the front, and she was right, and she's been gone 7 years and I still hear her saying it. So let me back up. The hall was the Bell Creek Grange, which is a tin-roofed barn of a building with a wood floor somebody waxes twice a year whether it needs it or not. And that night it needed it, because the whole valley had tracked half the road in on their boots. There were folding tables down one wall with crock pots on them, the orange kind and the brown kind, every one of them somebody's mother's, and a coffee earned the size of a milk can, and paper plates going soft under casseroles. Propane heaters roaring in 2 corners, and still you could see your breath near the door every time it opened. A man named Prout had a PA set up on the stage, 2 speakers on poles, and a fiddle player and a fellow on a guitar and a heavyset woman who sang and kept time on a tambourine against her hip. They weren't good exactly, but they were loud and they were willing, and that's most of what a dance needs. It was a benefit. The Brandt place had burned in October, house and the new barn both. An electrical thing, started in the wall behind the dryer is what they decided, and the Brandts got out with the dog and the truck and the clothes they had on and nothing else. Insurance was being insurance about it. So the valley did what the valley does, which is cook too much food and pass a coffee can and dance in a cold building to raise money that won't begin to cover it but means more than the money. I'd put a check in the can already. I'd come for that, and to be honest I'd have left right after, except for Holly's. Holly's Mock has been my neighbor for 31 years and my friend for most of them, and he is the only man alive who can make me do a thing I've decided not to do, and he does it by simply refusing to hear the word no, the way a deaf old dog refuses your commands. He'd called the house 3 days running. He'd showed up Thursday with his truck idling in my yard and stood at my door with his hat in his hand like he was courting me. "You're going," he said. "Margian's making the green bean thing. The Brandt boy worked for you, you're going." The Brandt boy had worked for me, that's true, Toby. One summer 4 or 5 years back when his folks needed the money and I needed a back that wasn't 60 years old. Good kid, quiet. Showed up when he said he would and didn't talk while he worked, which in a 16-year-old is close to a miracle. I'd written my check on his account as much as the family's. But that wasn't a reason to stand in a cold building among 200 people I'd spent 7 years not standing among, and Holly's knew it, and he didn't care. So I went. I put on a clean shirt and the good coat, the one with the snaps, and I drove down the grade in the dark with the heater going and the radio off. And the whole way down I told myself I'd show my face for an hour and shake the hands that needed shaking and go home before the dancing started in earnest. I'm telling you this so you understand I had no business being where I was when that red boot came to a stop in front of mine. I had every intention of being gone. Let me tell you about the dancing, because that's the spine of this, and you ought to know it from the start. I have never danced. Not once, not properly, not in 66 years. I'll say that plain because there's no soft way to put it, and I've quit trying to find one. There are men who can't and men who won't, and I'm honestly not sure which I am, but the result's the same. Some men are built with a thing in them that lets them hear a beat and let go of themselves and trust their feet to a woman in front of 200 people, and I am not built that way. I was built to fix fence and pull calves and read weather and keep my mouth shut. And somewhere along the line, I decided that the dance floor was a kind of cliff edge. And I stood back from it the way you stand back from a drop-off, even when there's no wind to push you. It started young, I suppose. I was a tall, gangly thing as a boy, all knees, and my mother dragged me to the church socials and tried to make me waltz with the Hoyt girls, and I stepped on every one of them and went home red to the ears and decided that was that. But it didn't really set into me until later. It set in at my own wedding. Lorna and I got married in June of 1981 in her daddy's hay meadow, with the grass cut, and raked back to make a floor and a flatbed trailer for the band and 40 people in their church clothes sweating in the heat. She was 22. I was 23 and so in love with her I could hardly hold a fork. And there came the time, the way there does, when the band struck up slow and her daddy said something into the microphone about the bride and groom, and everybody turned to look at us. And Lorna stood up in that white dress with the little buttons all up the back, buttons I'd watched her sisters do up that morning, and she put out her hand to me. And I didn't take it. I want you to understand it wasn't cruelty. It wasn't even a decision, really, not a thought I had and turned over. It was a thing that happened in my body. 40 pairs of eyes on me and the grass under my boots and that band sawing away and her hand out in the gold light, and I felt the whole of me lock up like a truck in a snowbank, wheels spinning, going nowhere. I gave a little shake of my head. I said low so just she'd hear it, "I can't, Lorna." And the look that went over her face, it wasn't anger. I could have stood anger. It was a kind of quick understanding, a folding up. And then she made it go away before anyone could see it, and she laughed and said loud enough for the crowd, "Stubborn old mule, this one." And she pulled her daddy out onto the grass instead and danced with him, and the crowd laughed and clapped, and it was fine. It was fine. She made it fine, the way she made everything fine for 40 years. But I sat at the edge of my own wedding dance and watched my wife dance with every man there but me. And I have carried that to this day like a stone in my coat pocket. I keep forgetting is there until I put my hand in. She never let me forget it, and she never once threw it at me hard. That was her way. She'd hear a song come on the radio in the kitchen, and she'd hold out her hand with the dish towel still in it and say, "Come on, Cal, nobody's watching but the dog." And I'd say, "I don't dance, Lorna," same as always, and she'd sigh and say, "You'll dance with me yet," and go back to the dishes. Every few months for 40 years, at the mock anniversary party. At Toby Brandt's confirmation, even, where they had a band. At our own 30th, where the kids, we never had kids, I'll get to that, but I mean the nieces and nephews, where they'd printed up a little card and there was a dance and she stood up and put out her hand, 51 years old and still the prettiest thing in any room, and I said it again, that worn-out little thing. "I don't dance." And she sat back down beside me and put her hand on my knee and said, "I know it. I just like asking." She liked asking. I never gave it to her. And then she got sick, and it went fast at the end after going slow for a long while, and there was no music in that house anymore, just the machine that helped her breathe and the truck I drove to town for things that didn't help. And one morning in April she was gone, and I had never once danced with my wife. You spend 7 years up a mountain with a thing like that. It doesn't get lighter. You just get used to the weight of it the way you get used to a bad knee. I'd quit the world fairly thorough by then. I ran my cattle and I cut my wood and I fixed what broke and I went to town for feed and groceries and to the post office, and that was the size of my life, and I'd decided it was enough. Hollies came by. Margian sent food up with him. I went to the funerals when there were funerals because you owe people that, but I sat in the back and left before the lunch. I'd made myself small and far and quiet, and I'll be honest with you, I thought that was the whole rest of it. A man alone on a good piece of ground, getting older, doing his work, until one winter he doesn't come down for feed and somebody drives up to check. I'd seen it happen to other men and I'd thought, that's a fine enough way to go up here on your own ground, nobody making a fuss. I didn't think it was sad. That's the part I'd want you to hear if you've ever been there. From the inside it didn't feel sad, it felt like rest. So the vet. Marin Sunt came into the valley about 4 years back when old Doc Pell finally gave it up and sold her the practice. Pell had been our large animal man for 40 years, and we'd all of us figured we'd have to start hauling stock 2 hours to the clinic in the flats when he quit, and then this woman bought him out. A woman vet. There was talk, I won't pretend there wasn't, the kind of talk men make in the feed store about whether she'd be strong enough to turn a calf or push back when a 1,000-pound animal pushed her. I made some of it myself, I'm sorry to say. And then the calving season came and she answered every call, day or night, mud to her elbows. And by April nobody was talking anymore because she was better than Pell had been the last 10 years and everybody knew it. She wore red boots. That's the first thing I ever noticed about her before I'd said a word to her, before I knew her name. Doc Pell's truck used to pull into your yard and a tired old man would get out in green coveralls and gray boots, and that was that. This new one's truck pulled in, a Dodge, mud to the windows, a steel vet box in the bed, and out steps a woman of maybe 55 in coveralls and these red boots, scuffed up and worked in, but red, a color you don't see on a working ranch from one year to the next, and I remember standing in my own yard the first time and thinking, well, that's a strange thing to wear to a calving. like she'd brought a little flag of something in with her, a little bit of color into a brown month. I didn't think much past that for a long while. She was just the vet. She came up 3 or 4 times a year the way the vet does, and I paid her bills and we talked about the animal and not much else. She was all business, which I respected. She didn't fill the silence with talk, which I respected more. She had big square hands and a way of standing back from a nervous horse and just letting it settle on her before she touched it, and you can't teach a person that. They've either got it or they don't. But there were 3 times that built her into something more than the vet in my mind, and I'll tell them quick. The first was a heifer, a first calf heifer down in the night with the calf turned wrong, and I'd had my arm in her up to the shoulder for an hour and couldn't get it, and I'd called the new vet because Pell was gone. And Marin's son came up my grade at 2 in the morning in a sleet storm, alone, and she stripped off her coat in my cold barn and went to work. And between the 2 of us, we turned that calf and pulled it, and it lived, and the heifer lived. And when it was done, she sat back on her heels in the straw. Steam coming off both of us, blood to her elbows, and she didn't whoop or carry on. She just looked at the calf trying to stand, and she said, quiet, "There he is. There he is," like she was glad for him and didn't need me to be glad with her. And I thought I could work with this one. That's about the highest thing I know how to think about a person. The second was a thing I'm not proud of how I acted. My old dog, Banjo. He was 13, a healer, my dog and Lorna's dog before she went, the last living thing in that house that remembered her, and he'd gone down in the hind end and couldn't get up to do his business and looked at me with a misery I couldn't fix. And I'd put it off a week longer than I had any right to because I couldn't stand to be the one to do it. And I called Marin, and she came up, and she got down on the kitchen floor with him, just down on the floor in her coveralls, and she rubbed his ears and talked to him low for a good while before she ever opened her bag. And when it was done, it's quicker than you'd think and gentler. She stayed down there on the floor with her hand on him a long minute, and then she looked up at me standing there like a fool with my hat in my hands, and she said, "He was a good dog. You can tell which ones were loved." And then she let herself out so I could be alone with him, didn't make me walk her to the truck, just gone. She charged me for the visit. She didn't charge me for the staying. I noticed that on the bill, and it's a small thing, but I never forgot it. The third was the colt. A yearling that got himself wrapped in wire in the dark and tore his leg up bad, and she came and stitched him in the alley of my barn under a work light with the bugs coming in. And it was a long job, 90 minutes, 2 of us holding that scared colt steady, and somewhere in there, working, not looking at me, she started to talk. Not much, but she told me her husband had passed, 4 years before she came to the valley, a truck driver killed on a road in the rain by a man who'd been awake too long. She said it the way you say a thing you've said before, and don't need to bleed over anymore, just a fact. The colt's leg under her hands the whole time. She said she'd sold their place after and looked at the map and put her finger on this valley because it was about as far from that road as she could get and still keep doctoring animals. I didn't say much back. I told her about Lorna, not much, about the same amount. We were 2 people stitching a colt in a barn, telling each other the worst thing that had happened to us in flat voices. And when the colt was sewed up and standing, she packed her bag and washed her hands at my hose and said good night. And I stood in my yard and watched her taillights go down the grade and felt something I hadn't felt in years, which was the simple wish that a person would come back. I never said a word of any of that to her. I want to be clear about the kind of man you're dealing with here. I'm not a man who says things. I'm a man who notices the red boots and keeps it to himself for 4 years. Now back to the Grange. I'd done my time. I'd shaken the hands. I'd told the Brants I was sorry for their trouble, and Toby had grown a foot and shook my hand like a man, and that was good to see. I'd had a plate of Margian's green bean thing, and a square of somebody's cornbread, and a cup of coffee out of the milk can urn. And I'd parked myself in a folding chair against the back wall under a banner some kids had painted. Bell Creek stands with the BRANDTS. And I was watching the floor and counting the minutes till I could leave without it being an insult to anyone. The band had got going. Couples were out there, old couples mostly. The ones who have been dancing in this hall since Eisenhower, moving slow and sure, and a few young ones being silly, and some kids skidding around in their sock feet. Hollies and Margian were out there, 31 years married, Margian's head against his chest. Hollies with his eyes closed, and watching them I felt that old stone in my pocket, the wedding dance stone, and I put my hand on it without meaning to. And then the red boots came across the floor toward me and stopped a foot from mine. I looked up. Marin sunt. Out of her coveralls, in jeans and a good wool shirt the color of a winter sky, her hair down, which I'd never seen, she always had it back for work. And the red boots. She had a coffee in each hand, and she held one out to me without a word, and I took it. And she pulled the folding chair from beside me around so it faced me a little and sat down in it. And for a while we just sat there at the edge of the floor with the band sawing and drank coffee and watched. The way two people who work outdoors can sit together a long time without anybody needing to fill it. After a while she said, "I didn't figure you for a man who came to dances." "I'm not," I said. "Holly's." Like the name was a whole explanation, which to anybody who knows Holly's it is. She smiled at that. She had a good smile late, like she made you wait for it. "He got me too," she said. "Margian." 6 phone calls. And we watched the floor some more, and the fiddle player tore off into something fast, and the young ones whooped, and she sipped her coffee and said, easy as anything, not looking at me, "You want to dance?" "No," I said. I didn't soften it, I didn't dress it up. 40 years of practice goes into a no like that, it comes out smooth and final, the door already shut behind it. "I don't dance," I said. "Never have, but thank you." And here's the thing she did that not one person in 66 years had done. She didn't laugh it off. She didn't say, "Stubborn old mule," and pull somebody else onto the floor. She didn't get that quick folded-up hurt my Lorna got, God rest her, the one I'd given her at our own wedding and 100 times after. Marin Sunt just nodded slow, like I'd told her something true and useful, like I'd told her the soil up at my place was sandy or the well ran low in August. "All right," she said, and she meant it. She turned back to the floor and drank her coffee and let it be. And we sat there, and I'll tell you I felt strange, because the no had come out smooth as ever, but for the first time in all those years it didn't sit right in me after. It sat in me like a thing I'd done instead of a thing that was just true about me. I sat there beside this woman in the red boots, and I watched Holly's and Margian turn slow on the floor, and I thought about Lorna with the dish towel still in her hand. "Come on, Cal, nobody's watching but the dog." And I thought, you fool. You old fool. You've spent your whole life saying no to the one thing every good woman you ever knew tried to give you, which was her hand and a turn around a floor. And now there's a good woman beside you and you've gone and done it again, smooth as you please. And you'll go home up the grade and feed your cattle in the morning, and that'll be the size of it. That'll be the whole rest of it, just like you decided. It felt like rest, I'd told you. The being alone. From the inside it felt like rest. But sitting there with that coffee going cold in my hand and the red boots beside me, for the first time it felt like the other thing. It felt like a man lying down in the snow. She finished her coffee. She set the cup under her chair. She said something about the Brants, how the boy was going to make a hand, and I agreed that he was, and the band finished the fast one, and the heavy-set woman with the tambourine said something about slowing it down for the old married folks, and the fiddle player put down his fiddle and picked up a different thing, a slow one, and the guitar came in soft under it, and the couples on the floor came together and started to turn. And Marin Sunt stood up out of that folding chair. I figured she was leaving. I'd have understood it. A man tells you no twice, well, once, but I'd put enough into the one no for two, and you've had your coffee and done your sitting, and there's no reason to spend your whole evening next to a wall. I figured she'd say good night and go find better company, and I'd have watched her red boots go across the floor and out the door, and I'd have driven home, and that would have been the story, and it wouldn't have been much of one. But she didn't go toward the door. She stepped around in front of me, the way she'd stepped around in front of a nervous horse 100 times in my barn, slow, letting me settle on her. And she stood there in the red boots a foot from my own, and she put out her hand. "I already asked," she said. "I know, and you told me no, and you meant it, and I heard you." She wasn't smiling now. She was just looking at me level, the way she'd looked at the calf trying to stand, the way she'd looked up at me from the kitchen floor with her hand on my dog. "I'm asking again," she said, "because I drove 40 minutes of bad gravel to come to this thing, and I didn't come for the green bean casserole, and I didn't come for the Brants, though God knows I'm glad to help them. I came because I knew Holly's would get you here. I've been watching you sit against walls for 4 years, Cal Rowe, and I'm too old to play it cool, and I'm too old to pretend I don't know my own mind. So I'm asking you twice, dance with me." And then lower, just for me, the way I'd given Lorna that first no all those years ago, low so just she'd hear it, she gave it back to me turned around. "Nobody's watching but the dog, and there's no dog." I want to tell you what went through me, and I can't exactly because it wasn't words. It was the thing that had locked me up at my own wedding, the truck in the snowbank, the wheels spinning, I felt that come up. And under it, the stone in my pocket. And under that, Lorna's voice, "You'll dance with me yet," and the kitchen, and the dish towel, and all the times I'd said no and watched the hurt fold up behind a good woman's eyes. And here was one more good woman, with her own dead behind her and her own steel in her and her own life she'd built alone, standing in red boots in a cold hall holding out her hand, not asking to be saved, not asking me to be soft, not asking me to be anything but a man who'd stand up and put his hand in hers. She didn't need me. That's what I understood sitting there. She didn't need a single thing from me. She had her practice and her truck and her own 2 hands that could turn a calf or stitch a colt at 2 in the morning. She wasn't out of options, and she wasn't out of pity. She was a strong woman who had looked at a closed-up old man on a mountain for 4 years and decided, of her own free will, with nothing to gain, that she wanted him to stand up. That's a different thing than being asked. That's being chosen. I put the coffee cup down under the chair next to hers. My knees aren't what they were, and I came up out of that folding chair slower than I'd have liked, and I felt every eye that wasn't already on the floor turned toward the back of the hall. Because in a valley this size everybody knows that Cal Rowe doesn't dance, has never danced, and here was Cal Rowe getting up out of his chair with the new vet's hand out in front of him. I heard somebody Hollies, it was Hollies, the old fool, I heard Hollies say, "Well, I'll be," from out on the floor, soft, the way you'd say it watching a calf you'd given up on get to its feet. I took her hand. It was a big square hand, and it was warm, and it was strong, a working hand, and it closed around mine and didn't let it shake. She put my other hand on her waist. I didn't know where to put it, and she just took it and put it there. And she put her free hand up on my shoulder, and she stepped me out onto that waxed floor among all those people, and the fiddle was going slow and sweet and the guitar under it, and I did not know one thing about what to do. "I don't know how," I said low, 66 years old, and I had to say it to her face. "Marin, I don't know how to do this." "I know you don't," she said. She wasn't laughing at me. There wasn't a speck of laughing at me in her. "It's the easiest thing there is. You just stand up straight and you hold me steady and you let me feel where you're going to go. You've been steadying scared animals your whole life. It's the same. You're the steady one. I'll do the rest. You're the steady one. I'll do the rest." And the strangest thing, it was true. I stood up straight, the way I'd stand to turn a frightened horse, and I held her, and I felt her weight settle on me a little the way the horse settles when it decides it can trust you. And I found I could move my feet without thinking too hard about them if I just thought about holding her steady, about being the post she turned around instead of trying to be light and quick and clever, which I never was and never will be. I'm not built for clever. I'm built to stand still in a wind, and it turned out that was enough. That was the whole thing. A floor full of people cleverer than me, and I just stood tall and held that woman steady and let her show my feet where to go. And we turned, slow, in the middle of all of them. And the room kind of went away around the edges the way it does when you finally do the thing you've been afraid of and find out it's nothing. It's nothing. It's just standing up and holding on. She put her head against my chest after a while. Not her cheek, her forehead, just leaned it in against me where I expect she could hear my heart going harder than a slow dance accounts for. And she didn't say anything about that. And her hair smelled like wood smoke, and a little like the antiseptic that never quite comes off a vet's hands. And her red boots moved next to my old gray ones on that waxed floor. And I held her. And I want to tell you I felt my Lorna somewhere glad about it, not jealous glad. The way she'd been glad for the calf. There he is. That's the thing I felt, there he is. But I'll not put words in a dead woman's mouth. I'll just say I held Marin Sant in the middle of the Bell Creek Grange, and I did not lock up, and I did not spin my wheels, and I did not look a fool. I looked like a man dancing with a woman who'd chosen him. Hollies told me later half the hall had stopped to watch, and the other half had the grace to pretend not to. I didn't see any of them. I saw the top of her head and the red boots, and that was the size of the whole world for the length of that song, and it was enough. It was more than enough. It was more than I'd had in 7 years up that mountain telling myself the cold was rest. The song ended. The fiddle player let it ring out, and the guitar came down soft after it, and then it was just the noise of the hall, the crock pots and the kids and somebody's chair scraping. We stopped turning. I didn't let go of her hand right away, and she didn't pull it back. She tipped her head up and looked at me, and there was that smile, the late one, the one you have to wait for. And there was something else in her face I'd not earned and didn't know what to do with, plain trust, like she'd handed me something and wasn't worried about getting it back. "There," she said, "now you've danced." Now I've danced, I said. My voice came out rougher than I meant it. You're better at it than you think, she said, and she squeezed my hand once and let it go, and she said she ought to go say her goodbyes, and she went and did that, and I stood there in the middle of the floor a second like a man who'd just been let off a horse he didn't know he could ride, and then I went and found my coat. I'll tell you the end of it, because it's the part I think about most, and it's a quiet thing. We took it slow, her and me. We're not young, and we'd both buried somebody, and neither one of us had any use for foolishness. She'd come up to doctor an animal and stay for coffee. I drove down to the flats one Sunday, and we ate in a diner and didn't say a whole lot, and that was fine. She liked that I didn't fill the silence. I liked that she didn't either. It was an easy thing, finally, after a hard life of hard things, and we were both old enough to know what we had and not waste it being cool about it. But here's the picture I'd leave you with. It's spring now, near a year on. There's a new pup in my kitchen, a healer, 8 weeks, that Marin brought up because she said the house was too quiet and a man my age shouldn't be living in a quiet house, and she was right. She's right about most things. And there's an evening this last week, the light going long and gold across my floor the way it does in May, and I had the radio on low for the weather and a song came on after it. A slow one, an old one, and I was standing at the sink and Marin was at my table with her boots off. The red ones by the door where she leaves them now, her feet up on the other chair, reading something comfortable as a cat. And I dried my hands on the towel, and I walked over to her, and I put out my hand. She looked up at me over the top of her reading glasses, and she looked at my hand, and that late smile came up slow, and she didn't say a word, she just took it. And I pulled her up out of the chair in her sock feet, no boots, the pup going crazy around our ankles. The weatherman come back on the radio now talking about a front moving in, no music at all really, and I held her steady the way she'd taught me. The post she turns around, and we danced a few slow turns on my kitchen floor in the gold light with the dog barking and the dishes half done. An old man who never danced and the woman who asked him twice. I'm the one asking now, that's the part. I'm the one who reaches out the hand. You'll dance with me yet, Lorna used to say. I did, old girl, I did. It just took me a while to find my feet, and it took a woman in red boots, and it took her asking me twice.